I'm Ilse, a cellist and composer. I live in Ireland in County Cork. My grandmother was Irish and emigrated to Australia, and I feel a deep connection to my Irish roots and to the music. I published a book and recorded a CD of 10 Irish airs for solo cello. I arranged 9 of the airs and composed one myself, and in the process I discovered how enchanting and interesting the stories behind the airs can be. So today, I begin a journey around Ireland with filmmaker Maarten Roos to search for the origins of these beautiful airs. We start with the song Carrickfergus. We make our way to Northern Ireland to meet the MacLean family, who live near the town of Carrickfergus.
I could say I heard Carrickfergus. I wouldn't even tell you how long ago since I heard it. Well, you can talk about 50 plus anyway. I know it's been always, and there's always some artist comes along and actually gives it you know, a lifter gives it something, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Phil Coulter, and I mean, he played it in part of his repertoire, and then Kennedy. What do you call the singer? Brian Kennedy.
Brian Kennedy, yeah.
He brought it up, and he brought it up. There's other singers who brought it up. There's always somebody comes along, just gives that wee something different, and then everybody's singing it again.
I wish I was in Carrickfergus, only for nights in Ballygrand. I would swim over the deepest ocean, only for nights in Ballygrand. But the sea is wide that I cannot swim over, and neither have I the wings to fly. I wish I could find me a handsome boatman to ferry me over.
The song could be about anywhere.
Yeah,
I mean, there's nothing in it to say that it's definitely Carrickfergus. The sea.
except for the name.
Except the name, and you have the sea, all right,
Yeah.
and across the loch and all that, but the boatman. But outside that, I mean, I would say we're writing a song about Carrickfergus, you know, the castle, and you know, some more historical facts in it. It was actually about Carrickfergus. But that's all right. Carrickfergus have adopted, so what?
With gold and silver.
The story I've heard about the song is that it was written about some Carrickfergus down in the south of Ireland somewhere. So it's not actually anything to do with Carrickfergus in the north. But of course, Carrickfergus people wouldn't say that, and we've adopted it and stole it.
I mean, but it's made it actually, well, you could say world famous, because I mean, I did research, some American artist sang it way back in the 50s or something. Can't remember who it was. So it made it famous then. So I meant he was an American, so he made it famous. So.
Ah, but I'm sick now. My days are over. So come all ye young men and lay me down. And I'm drunk today, and I'm sad and sober, a handsome rover from town to town. Ah, but I'm sick now. My days are over. So come all ye young men and lay me down.
I'll send you.
Always wants a better. That's it, Seamus. Give us a good laugh.
That's it. There we go. Yeah.
Aim a Knick, or Ned of the Hill, was from County Tipperary, and it's in this area where renowned composer and performer Micheál O'Sullivan lives. We visited him at his house.
Yes, you are in the right place. You are in the right
I
place.
remember it, Micheál.
Come on. Great to see you. Come on in. Come on in.
I brought your post for you too.
Oh, thank you. Very good. Very clever. Very clever. So basically, if you look at when you write down a tune from oral tradition or from traditional music, I always think of it as a bit like a snapshot. So it's like the oral equivalent of taking it at a particular point of time. Now, the great thing about it is Irish music has been collected in manuscripts and in, in book form since about the middle of the 16th century. And this amazing collection here by a former teacher of mine called Fleischmann, The Sources of Irish Traditional Music, 2 volumes from 1600 to 1855. Yeah. There are 7,000 snapshots in this, 7,000 transcriptions of traditional tunes. So the big question is Eamon Connectin here? The earliest one is tune number 1023, and I've just pulled it out here. 1023, now you can see it here. Now it's in a book called 12 Scotch and 12 Irish Airs, and the subtitle is With Variations, set for the German flute, violin or harpsichord, London, 1745, so mid-18th century. So, I don't know, 1745, 1845, 95, so like nearly 250 years ago, we have the first snapshot. And so I just play through it because it's quite different from the one we know, but it is a version of it, I think, you know. Version, isn't
very
it?
Beautiful.
Very different from the other. Yeah. But I think in the second part, do you know?
The second part has the exactly.
And this is. So again, what we're learning here is how the tunes change across generations.
Yes.
And you know. Now, to the next one, London again, 1789.
Okay, still
so
early.
Did we say 1745, the last one? So approximately, what is it, 40, 50, 67, about 40 years later, it gets picked up in Thompson's complete collection of 200 favourite country dances. Now, I haven't played this before, so I'll just try and sight read it. It's kind of like the last one. The song itself, the words, I was looking at the words here, I think I have them just here. And to speakers of the Irish language, even as a second language, it's a very familiar song. It starts with Céhéisian a má bhfuil féir erachá a réba machar stúnta, mi sé éman a chnic tá báite fuair fluch or hir hiúil slétas glánta. And it translates, it starts off with a question. Who's that outside with the edge in his voice who's banging on my closed door? So it's a question, and then the answer comes from, in a way, beyond the door. I'm Eamon of the hill. I am drowned cold and wet from continually walking the mountains and the glens. So whoever set the text up, set it up as a kind of a dramatic wandering rapparee or bandit who's wandering the hills of Tipperary, the glens of Aherlow, or all this area here in North and Mid Tipperary, Upper Church, which is quite near from here, which is where he was born. It's essentially a love song. He's pleading from outside the door, but it's also political. He's asking for a safe house. He's asking to be let in. He's asking to be taken in, to be protected in a way. Because I presume it's a she, goes on from inside, a lee gills a chid, cadi yelamid, that my dear, dear love, what will I do for you? And then there's a reference, a nominous reference, is gomeg púder dove or loch lingotuv, which means that gunpowder will blow us up unless we can be protected.
What did he do that he was...
Well, he was involved in the wars between William of Orange and James II in terms of the kingship of England. And this was very important to the Irish peasant class, if you wish, because if James could come back and get power, Catholicism would be back in the driving seat, whereas with William of Orange, it was a religious war as well as everything else. And the name James, the Latin for James is Jacobus, so it gives the adjective Jacobite.
Okay. Yes.
So if you were a Jacobite, you were a James person. So therefore, there's a lot of Jacobite songs. So if you think Jacobite, James II, as it turned out, the Great Battle of the Boyne, William of Orange, or King Billy, as he would be known in Northern Ireland, King Billy, of course, won. And look, we're still living out part of that conflict. So you can imagine singing that with those words to that tune in a particular context would be very highly charged.
Would be very.
Yeah, if your audience is kind of into that, you know, and there's a feeling of defeat and at the same time revisiting the hopes of that particular era. You know yourself, you're thinking back on something that happened and suddenly you stumble on photographs to follow through the photographic image, and you have a handful of photographs, right? And the photographs are of particular moments, bang, the whole thing comes back as a flow. So the snapshots, in that case visual snapshots, in our case sonic snapshots, sound snapshots, can act as keys to unlock the flow between the snapshots. You come into the emotion of the tune and then it broadens out into history and into the social origins and the social realities, how it has lasted, where it is now, which is just as important as where it was then. And our snapshots in Fleischmann's sources have been very helpful to us, I think.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Thank you, Micheál. That's fantastic. Right. Yeah.
Well, good stuff.
Our next stop is Kilkenny to meet with historical harpist Siobhan Armstrong. We will be talking about the air Aisling an Og Ir, or The Young Man's Dream.
This harp is a copy of the harp which is depicted in the national emblem of Ireland. So if you look at a euro coin or our passports or a certain brand of beer, you will see this very particular kind of harp. And it's not just an artist's fantasy impression of harp. No, this is a real instrument which survives, the original survives in Trinity College in Dublin in the old library. It's very, very beautiful, and it's our only surviving late medieval harp. So it's the earliest harp we have in Ireland.
Really?
The Trinity College harp, also sometimes known as the Brian Boru harp.
And then with this tune, can you give me the name in Irish?
Oh yes, I call this tune, as did the man who collected it and presumably the man who played it to him, Cllo an Og Ir. Cllo means sleep, Far is a man, Og means young, and so you'd say Og Ir, Far Og becomes Og Ir, so Cllo an Og Ir, the sleep of the young man, or the young man's sleep. In 1792 in Belfast, a group of people came together. They could see that this tradition was dying out. They were culturally aware, saw that it was something very Irish that needed preservation. And so they had a harpers meeting in Belfast to which they invited all the harpers in Ireland to show up. All the harpers in Ireland, or most of them, turned out to be 10 mainly elderly Irish harpers who showed up. Denis O'Hampsey was the oldest of the bunch who showed up. He came from Limavady. This man is the last vestige of the medieval harping tradition, and he's still alive and kicking at the end of the 18th century. He's the only one who's playing the really, really old repertoire that none of the rest of them play. And this is one of the tunes that he played to the teenager who was given the task of writing the music down. The teenager in question was one Edward Bunting, who was 19 years old. He was a musical prodigy, a trained church organist. The notebook that he actually used in Belfast to write down the tunes and all the information from the harpers has survived. And when I was a child, I always thought it must have been this big tome. I could imagine him with his quill pen and this vast, great volume. And I was really surprised when I saw the original, because it's this, when it's closed, it's this size.
It's a notebook.
It truly is a little notebook. This is one of the tunes you're interested in.
Yes.
So this is the folio in the manuscript, and at the top he's written in English, "The Young Man's Dream." So he has these 2 lines of the tune, and you'll notice that it's just a melody. There's no bass line attached, and that's the case for most of this manuscript.
So after meeting Siobhan, we made our way up to Limavady in Northern Ireland to record the air there. We found a beautiful setting in the Roe Valley. Let's see if we're way down. Oh no, it's going to be down here. I wonder if Dennis O'Hempsey was down here with his harp in the water and playing. It's beautiful. This is really gorgeous. This is a place you'd dream and listen to the music of the river. Our next destination is Loughrea in County Galway. This is where the Power family lived. The air Fanny Power was written for the young Francis or Fanny Power by the harper Turlough O'Carolan. Siobhan Armstrong talks about Carolan and his music.
Turlough Carolan and all his contemporaries in the 18th century, Arthur O'Neill and Cornelius Lyons and David Murphy, they all played the early Irish harp because they were all the last players from this incredibly illustrious medieval high art music tradition. And so these are the last people in the 18th century, and Carolan is one of the very last composers. He's one of the last harper composers. So medieval harpers would have presumably stayed in one place and had an aristocratic patron, so a chieftain or king.
Okay.
And so they were quite high up in the pecking order at the Gaelic court. So the king is the most important person. The next most important person is rather surprising at a Gaelic court. It's not a judge, it's not a politician. It is in fact the filla or poet. So we're an amazingly cultured society, Gaelic society. The king, the filla or poet. The next person who in the pecking order who's a freeman is the harper. Okay. So harpers were highly respected and very wealthy people in the Middle Ages. Okay. But of course the Gaelic tradition starts to break down. And in the 16th century, it's falling apart, of course, due to the politics of what's going on. But by the time of Carolan, all of the harpers, I think, basically, are itinerant musicians travelling from one great house to the next and playing their music for their patrons and then moving on to the next patron. And it's interesting that the patrons are quite diverse. So if somebody like Cllo Carolan, for example, is a very clever harper, he knows what to write for the people for whom he is writing. And so for his Anglo-Irish patrons, he composes the newly fashionable Baroque tunes, or his take on newly fashionable Baroque music. And for his Gaelic patrons, he composes beautiful old Gaelic laments and much more Irish tunes. So he's capable of composing in two different idioms to suit people.
Oh, and would Fanny Power be more on the English side?
Oh, I think Fanny Power is quite Baroque, don't you think?
Well, it's very Baroque,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to find where the Power family had lived nearly 300 years ago. I had an address, Corheen, Loughrea. We just came down a little trackway where it looked like it was Corheen, and it was obviously a big grand house at the end. We've driven down to the end and we did sure enough find Corheen House, and we talked to Bishop John Kirby, and apparently this house was built to replace the old Powers house. And we're now going to go and find the site where the ruin of the house is, and he's told us exactly where it is and shown us on the map. So it's very exciting. We're going to the spot where Fanny Power used to live. So here we go. It wasn't far, but tricky enough to find. Eventually a local man directed us to the right path to take. We hauled our gear about 1 kilometre to the loch at the bottom of the field. By the loch there was a man leaning against a tree. He seemed very peaceful, watching his cows. I asked him if he knew where the Powers house had been, and he said yes, it was on his land, and he was happy to show us.
Now, on that little hill, that's where the house was.
Is that right?
Just on that little hill there. And you see, there's just a track of one wall here. See the foundation. If you watch where I walk now,
Okay.
and you'll see where the foundation really was.
Oh.
And it's the empty here.
Okay.
You see that little dip that's there now?
Yeah.
Just that little dip along there. That was the foundation of the house. And we're going over. We came to that corner, and we'll go over here. I'm just trying to think how big it was. You see, there was a foundation there when I got this, and as I told you, I was made clear of the way out of it. But it was over along here. It must have been a huge house. It was over
Wow.
to about here, I think, and went up past the tractor there. But all the stones were taken out of here and brought over to build the bishops. But you see, there's only over across there. That was the avenue. That was the way into the house.
Okay.
That was the avenue.
Right.
You went off down there and went over by the brow of the lake, all the way over. And that's the way you used to go to town, into Loughrea.
And then this entrance here, was this part
That
of...
was the entrance. Do you see the gate?
Oh, where it's built up there, yeah.
Yes. That was were the two pillars. Yes. And then there was a style for going in and out there. And that had gone, but I remade it
Oh,
myself.
beautiful. Oh, well done. thank you so much for showing us. It's really appreciated.
I like history myself.
Yeah, great. It was beautiful. It was wonderful finding the actual place where Fanny Power lived, and so I just sat here and wrote this. Here I am on the very stone that is the foundation of Fanny Power's house. I'm transported by the bucolic setting into her parlour, where she laughed and cried, where she fell in love and perhaps even died. Looking out to the loch, so softly blue as the sun sets behind her, perhaps she sat here dreamily as she listened to Carolyn play his harp with the new melody he wrote for her. A tear moistening her eye, a tear of joy and maybe even trepidation of the early spring day when she will soon be wed to her love. A gentle spider crosses her hand and she smiles a peaceful smile. I first heard the air Aura Nalaur from traditional fiddle player Matt Cranich. I met with Matt at the University College Cork. Matt, thanks a lot for meeting.
You're welcome.
Very, very nice to see you. Now, I wanted to ask you about Aura Nalaur. Is that how you say it exactly?
Aura Nalaur, yes.
Aura Nalaur.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember when you first learnt that or heard that tune?
I don't really. I grew up playing the fiddle, playing traditional music, and I was always keenly interested in playing slow airs, and in parallel with that, listening to Sean-Nó's singers, from which I learned many of the great tunes. I don't sing myself, but I play the Sean-Nó's tunes, which we call slow airs. So I can't remember when I started to play this tune, but it's a long time ago, certainly.
And would you tell us the story behind the tune?
Well, Tomás Roa O'Sullivan, a school teacher and poet, whose dates were 1785 to 1848, was moving from Derrynane to Portmagee, and he put all his treasured books and other belongings on a boat, and he went by road himself, but of course the boat didn't withstand the gale and sank with the loss of the books, and for a school teacher and for a poet in particular, losing a valuable collection of books, I suppose compelled him to write this lament, which he called Aura Nalaur, the Song of the Books, and it's also known as Cuan Valentia, or Valentia Harbour.
And were the words that he wrote written to an earlier air, or was that the melody he wrote? Is that known?
I don't know, and I've never been able to get an answer to that as to whether or not he wrote this tune. I suspect he didn't. I suspect he wrote the poem, or a song as it might be called, which was set to this particular tune. And maybe it partly explains why the tune lives in its own right as an instrumental piece of music, an instrumental melody, in parallel with the song version. Go Cuan Valentia cosad me, cos gólin evening darivre, mar shoulder fleet the farige, her soile again. I bort Magee the stadas shall, fe horum inting wasa, down ve shallad at her in Varsha lane. Is garga chola on tachtra I Cork Malayan, gur imod oin in the Cailag has on Tartak train. The frab macrela hattersher I dev ling on tiesig chalma, sco marada and tier I has shall, no ride on tain.
We headed to Portmagee and Valentia Island, where we planned to film, and on the way we saw the sign to Derrynane, where Thomas's boat had left from. Derrynane, home of Daniel O'Connell, the Liberator. We followed the sign and came across the house of the well-known 19th century political leader Daniel O'Connell. We went in and we started talking to a woman named Geraldine. I asked her if she knew of Tommaso Sullivan, and she said he was buried down at Derrynane Harbour in a cemetery by a 10th century monk's chapel. Pass the bell that rings only when an O'Connell family member dies, go to the harbour and across the beach. There's the bell. The O'Connell bell. So this is Derrynane Harbour. Now let me just see if we can actually, just how close we can get. I can come up again. We arrived at the beach and saw Geraldine again.
And you walk past that and you see the bow base of the chapel there?
Yeah.
And it's just on the other side of the chapel.
I'm going to go and play my cello on to his grave.
That would be a beautiful place to play your cello.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Yes, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really special.
Just as an honour.
Yes, for him, yes.
Yeah, for him.
I'll give you, if you come up to our house afterwards, which is this one here, I'll show you some writing written about him in 1929.
Sweet. That's it, 1785 to 1848. Thomas Roos Sullivan. The harp. Geraldine has this collection of Thomas Roos O'Sullivan's descendants, and this is from the paper, and it talks about, above all, we sympathise with the poet on the loss of his rare manuscripts, the Psalter of Cashel, the Blessed Book of Leinster, Gallagher's Sermons, and the works of Keating and many others. We next went to Galway to meet with Ilse O'Leary. Ilse works with the National University of Ireland as head of the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultures. He sings the song A Storm a Cree, so I wanted to ask him about its origins. Thanks for meeting us, Ilse.
Oh, it's really nice to meet you.
Really
Oh, honest to God.
So then the background of A Storm a Cree?
Storm a Cree, the air of Storm a Cree is from another song called Bruach na Carrigabaine, which exists in many, many different versions, and this is just one version of them. There's also a song by a South Ulster poet called Art McCooey, and he wrote a song about it's kind of political song about the loss of Gaelic identity and power and influence under the conquest, and it's called Bruach ún Réide. It goes like this: Bruach ún Réide agnes leban wurge geblaio Hualus game na quanti edon es fuam suspeden ardu na dole teo sagola heles grush na gren bate agus fuam na nyen fua grush gel le gruam gud na kaga. Just kind of a relative of
That's very
Storm
close.
McCree, yeah, but just different enough to be,
to be
really
different.
interesting.
And with the Storm McCree, the words of the English version?
Well, the words are composed by Brian O'Higgins, who was born in the late 19th century, and he was quite a writer. And I suppose at the time when immigration was really common, he made the song, probably wrote it, using an Irish air, and the Gaelic air is so plangent, I suppose. It has that melody, it just sort of digs into you.
Yeah, it's exquisite.
Yeah, and it's very sad as well. I don't know what the mode of it is, but whatever way it's put together, there's a feeling of loss and longing associated with that tune. I found it very hard to sing that song for a long time because I couldn't reconcile the sentimentality of the words to my own aesthetic.
Yes.
And then I just said, just do it. Everybody else loves it, why can't you love it too? Storm grief when you're far away from the land that you'll soon be leaving. It's many a time by night and by day your heart will be sorely grieving, though the stranger's land may be rich and fair, and bright in its treasures, golden you'll pine, I know, for the long, long ago, and the love that will never grow olden. A storm grief when the evening mist over mountain and meadow is falling. Won't you turn away from the throng and listen, and maybe you'll hear me calling. The voice that you'll hear will be surely mine, for somebody's speedy returning. Arun, Arun, won't you come back soon? to the ones that will always love you.
I was spending a lot of time coming down here to Inch Beach, and I would actually sit up here and just dream, listen to the wind and look at the weather coming in, and this was a really special spot for me actually. And I even drew a picture of the surroundings. I'd come up here and sketch and write notes, and so it was like my little dreaming hill. And when I was sitting up here one day and looking out to the sea, I was trying to make a melody just from the line in the landscape and hear what the line in the landscape was. And I feel like I came up here with my cello. I have a memory that I was up here with my cello, but I just think I was imagining so strongly that I was playing my cello up here. And I had this melody in my head, and I went home and played it, and it kept going through my head. And I was about to leave Inch because we had to move out of the house we were living in, and I really loved living down here and I loved the community, and I just couldn't find another place in the area. So I felt very sad about that, and that I'd lose my community and have to leave. And it's very hard being a foreigner and not having your family around and having to leave that as well, as not having what I'd built up basically. And so this piece held all that really. It was trying to express the sadness and express it in a way of beauty.